You know that moment when your phone lights up, and you see the message, and you don't open it. Not because you didn't notice, not because you don't care, but because something in you pauses. You tell yourself you'll reply later, when you have the right words, when you feel less scattered, when you can give it your full attention. And sometimes that later stretches longer than you meant it to. On the outside, it can look like distance, indifference, even arrogance. But that's rarely what's happening. People who don't reply right away are often misunderstood. In a world where speed equals interest and instant replies equal respect, hesitation can look like rejection. And over time, you may have felt quietly judged for it, labeled as slow, avoidant, too much in your head, or not invested enough. Yet this pattern isn't laziness, and it isn't coldness. It's something far more nuanced. The psychology of people who don't reply right away is rarely about the other person. It's about regulation. Research on cognitive load shows that every incoming message isn't just information. It's a demand, a small social request. Your brain doesn't simply read words. It calculates tone, intention, emotional weight, and possible consequences. For some nervous systems, especially more sensitive or reflective ones, that processing runs deep. Neuroscience tells us that when we anticipate social evaluation, even something as small as crafting a reply, the brain activates networks involved in self-monitoring and emotional regulation. For certain people, this system is highly attuned. They don't just send responses, they compose them. If you're someone who doesn't reply immediately, there's a good chance you value precision. You care about how you come across. You replay phrases before sending them. You consider how your words might land. That kind of conscientiousness takes energy. And when you're already mentally full, even a simple "hey" can feel like one more thing pulling on your attention. This pattern often has roots that go back further than messaging habits. If you grew up in an environment where words had consequences, where tone mattered, where misunderstandings escalated quickly, or where being wrong felt costly, your nervous system may have learned to slow down before responding, to think first, to calculate, to avoid missteps. In other cases, you may have been the emotionally responsible one, the one who mediated, explained, softened tension. When communication has historically meant responsibility, it makes sense that you don't approach it casually. Your brain adapted. It learned that responding isn't trivial. It's relational. It's impactful. For some people, quick replies feel natural and energizing. For others, they feel intrusive, not because they dislike people, but because they process connection internally before expressing it externally. Neither is superior. One nervous system moves outward quickly. Another moves inward first. The misunderstanding happens when speed becomes the metric for care. Here's the paradox. The people who take the longest to reply are often the ones who care the most about what they say. But there's also a quiet cost. When you delay responses to get them right, you may carry conversations in your head longer than anyone realizes. You may feel a low-grade tension in the background, unfinished loops waiting to close. The message isn't ignored. It lingers, and sometimes the more you wait, the heavier it feels. What started as, "I'll reply when I have space," turns into, "Now it's been too long." This isn't a flaw. It's a trade-off. Depth over speed. Intentionality over immediacy. But in a culture that rewards constant availability, that depth can be misread. It's important to say this clearly. Not replying right away does not mean you are detached. It doesn't mean you lack empathy. It doesn't mean you're playing games. It often means you're regulating. You're choosing the moment when you can show up properly instead of reactively. Some people text to discharge emotion. Others text when emotion has settled. Different wiring, different rhythms. And your rhythm makes sense. You may notice that when you finally do reply, it's thoughtful, measured, sometimes surprisingly warm, because you waited until you were present. That presence is a quiet strength, even if it isn't always understood. You are not broken for needing space between stimulus and response. In fact, that space is where self-awareness lives. There's something deeply human about wanting your words to reflect who you are, not just how you felt in a passing second. The pause isn't apathy. It's alignment. And if any of this feels familiar, it may point to something else about you too. The way you process conflict, the way you handle pressure, the way you show love more through depth than frequency. There's often a pattern underneath the pattern. If this resonated, there's more to explore about how your nervous system shapes the way you connect. And sometimes, understanding that wiring changes how you see yourself entirely.